G'day, hi and welcome. Let's just jump into this. Okay, I had an idea for a video. Big problem I have with like motorcycle videos and stuff like that is it's always geared towards beginners, it seems. Like everything's always at that, baby step kind of thing level, which kind of sucks, but I do want to get into more advanced kind of how to choose a motorcycle and stuff like that for like your second bike and stuff like that. But I'm going to go back to the baby steps again of what bikes I think are the worst bikes to learn on. And I just got random pictures of choppers and sport bikes and stuff like that coming up. So it's not really about any one specific motorcycle, but I'm going to use some specific models just so, something that people know what they are, and they'll get an idea of the formula of that bike, which will be good for a beginner, not good for a beginner. And I put it really into two types of bikes. So let's just say you just got out of your course, wherever your course. I mean, most places in the Western world have a motorcycle safety training course. Some places don't. If you're at a place that doesn't, I do recommend you take some. I know there's the bravado of, oh, I know how to ride. No, you don't. You don't even know what you don't know. I've been through two motorcycle safety courses in my life, and each one was both of them were a little different, and they were 18 years apart, right? So, or probably like 20 some odd years apart, actually. And the second time I took it, there was a lot of things that had changed, of just like little things of where to keep your hands on the levers. Where it used to be just a a 3-finger or 2-finger for the clutch and the brake, to get in the habit of taking your fingers right out of that, because if you ever did go down at low speed, the levers would crush your fingers, right? So it's better to have your hands on the outside of the levers, so you can let go, whether you use 2 fingers or 4 fingers or whatever, 3 fingers to pull in your clutch or brake, that doesn't matter, but as long as your fingers on the outside. So little stuff like that, they found out through statistics that people would basically break their fingers or lose their fingers if they went down. So it was, like stuff like that. You wouldn't know that if you were a noob, right? The other one is covering the back brake. That one's always been, it's something that I can't stress enough. I hate to see the leg dangler guys going through the guys that try to walk the bike through the intersection. These are the guys that always end up crashing, because if the bike's moving, feet on the pegs. It's just one of those things. And with the sport bike guys, like the new guys, we'll get into why sport bikes are horrible to start with. I know people do it anyway, but the things to consider is this. Okay, so you've taken your safety course. You did good in the safety course. No real mishaps or anything like that. You kind of got the basics of it. For example, up here in Quebec, you do 16 hours in the parking lot over a 2-weekend span, and if you pass the test, then you go on to the road test, which is, or the road practice, which is another 10 hours. So you get a total of 26 hours of riding motorcycles, and basically after that, your 10 hours of it is on the road, and then you do a final road test, I forget, like 2 months later or something like that. And basically you can wrap it all up in one season, so to speak, 1 or 2 seasons or whatever it is. And anyway, and then you're full licensed rider after a year, and you're good to go. So the problem you get is what you start on, right? So up here, if you anything bigger than a 650 or anything smaller than a 650cc bike that you learn on in the course, you can learn on a 250 if you want in the course, but then that'll be the biggest bike you can buy is a 250, which would really suck. You'd have to go back and get retested. So in the course they have they used S40 Suzuki Boulevard S40s, formerly known as a Suzuki Savage, and they use those, for example, as the bike. Now the bike itself, I have no qualms with. They're cool little bikes. They're a lot of fun. I don't think they're the best beginner bike, just because of they have forward controls. They got a kind of a narrow handlebar, cool handlebars, but narrow handlebars. The front end's a little bit long. It's a good cruiser, not a hard bike to ride, but at low speed it's a little bit darty. You know what I mean? But it is a nimble bike. It's a great bike otherwise, for what it is. And like I say, for here, if you got a 650, after a 650, if you've learned on a 650, if you can learn on a 650, you're pretty much good for any motorcycle size after that when you come out. But let's say you've never ridden before in your life. Like I grew up on motorbikes and stuff like that, so I had lots of dirt bike experience before I even went on the road, right? So I already knew how to do that stuff. It's just the road is different than the dirt, right? So what makes a good first bike? Well, a lot of people want to get, like the Ninja 300s, Ninja 400. I think the Ninja 400 would be a good bike because I don't think you would outgrow it too quick. But the bikes I wouldn't buy first, and this is typically the guys that'll buy these bikes will be older guys thinking that, I'm not going to go through, a one bike, two bike, three bike type of thing. I think you can pretty much go from your first bike to your dream bike after you get a bit of time under your belt on the road and stuff like that. But the first thing is super sport, super bike, anything, no. Just no, just no, just no. Yes, they're gorgeous. Yes, they're fast. The problem with sport bikes is they require they do not love you. They will kill you very quickly. What gets people, especially the leg dangler guys, these are the guys that get killed. If you don't know how to take off on a sport bike properly with the 1 foot technique type of thing, you really have no business being on that bike. The other thing that gets you is the throttles on these bikes are obviously designed to be responsive. So you hit a pebble, you speed up, right? You turn your head, you gotta be very conscious about throttle management when you turn your head, because you tend to jerk the throttle, maybe not buck yourself off the bike, but you end up going faster than what you probably should. R1 anything, stay away from it. You definitely want to have some riding experience before you get on a machine like that. The other thing is that the seating position on these sport bikes are very unorthodox, and they do take a while to get used to, right? So you've got a lot of power that comes on really quick on a bike that's really light and nimble, and it tends to get ahead of you. Now, getting the bike, and you'll hear guys like this all the time, I just can't ride slow, I'm too good, blah blah blah. What they're telling you is they have no low speed handling abilities. And as good as sport bikes are at high speed and moderate speeds, they really suck at low speeds, pretty much all of them. Why? You got a really short wheelbase, the bikes, like again, they have that kind of I want to fall over kind of feel to them. And again, with the weird seating position, the jockey position, it takes a while. It's harder to do shoulder checks at low speeds, which again for a noob is, well, no matter what kind of rider you are, it's a must to be able to do good shoulder checks. The mirrors are typically not that good to see past your shoulder on most sport bikes. Most sport bike mirrors suck. So again, they kind of require, you're trying to do that at low speeds. You're trying to, go through the traffic, keep an eye on everything while managing the twitchy throttle on a bike that feels kind of unstable at low speeds. So it's a recipe for disaster. It really is. The other thing is the braking on most sport bikes. Even the shitty sport bikes have really good brakes. So guy comes in a little bit too fast, especially the guys that don't know how to ride. They don't realize, back brake, front brake thing. Yes, you've got they hear everybody does this mistake, mainly the cruiser guys, but a lot of sport bike guys do this when they're new. It's like, well, the front brake has 70% stopping power or 90% stopping power, whatever. That is true, but that's the problem is if you only use the front brake, you'll dive the bike and make the bike unstable. The back brake is your best friend. You're almost better to just have a back brake than a front brake. And I would always say you have to have both brakes, but the back brake comes on first to stabilize the motorcycle, so it doesn't dive as much when you start applying pressure to the front brake. You will learn this in your course. And proper braking is hard enough for newbies to begin with. Yes, you'll get the bike stopped, but to stop the bike very smoothly so that it doesn't dive or buck around on you, especially if you're stopping in a corner. Sometimes that happens, where it's a bit of a corner where you're stopping, especially if you're stopping to the right. You know what I mean. On a sport bike, it can be, the guy's going to want to take their feet off the pegs almost instantaneously, and that could be, you could lose control of the bike pretty easy. Leg dangler types that just don't know when to put their feet on the pegs. You got to start off with, again, a foot on the peg on the sport bikes typically, but that comes with proper riding techniques and stuff like that. The other thing is just the speed gets away from you. Like, you have to speed check the bikes all the time. For example, my Triumph Daytona TT600, it's not the fastest 600cc super sport out there by any stretch of the imagination. But if I'm doing, say, 90 kilometers an hour, which is about 55 miles an hour or whatever, give or take, whatever the conversion is, and if I'm doing that speed on the highway and I have to come to a stop or whatever, again, these bikes do stop quick. And that's the other thing that a lot of people don't realize is these bikes are light, so they stop even, and they've got really powerful brakes, so they stop really quick. You have to be more mindful of the traffic behind you, because when you're coming to a stop, if you just stop, wait till the last minute to stop, yeah, you'll stop, but the guy behind you might not. And, you got to learn how to slow down the traffic behind you before you come to a full stop. Give yourself that safety margin. So you gotta always have to be thinking on the sport bike. The next one is it just gets ahead of you. So like I say, if I'm doing 90 kilometers an hour and I look up and I'm watching the cows go by, I look back down, I'm going to be doing 120. Why? Because like I say, these bikes just tend to want to accelerate. They don't maintain throttle very well. They're not designed for that. They're designed to, power it up and whatever. The other big one is people overpowering the back wheel while they're cornering. So they're going around the corner, they got the bike leaned over, and they go to accelerate, but again, some of these bikes are ridiculous in their power. They spin out the back wheel and down they go, right? So it takes a while to get smooth with a sport bike. Where to, getting proper riding position. Being able to get used to looking around, especially when you get tired when you're riding it on a sport bike. It can be it can be very fatiguing. You tend to want to drop your head more, which means you tend to start to stare at your dash rather than the road, which that's never good. So again, these are not good bikes to start on. I mean, the sport bike trainer bikes, as I call them, like Ninja 300, excellent bike. You're upright enough. Sport touring bikes, you're upright, not too bad. But I would really stay away from the super bikes for the first little bit. I mean, yeah, if you got, let's say you've been riding on the road for 6-8 months or whatever with a 250 or a 400 or a 500cc or a 650, which like a 600 Super Sport is a smaller displacement than a 650, but there's, the 600s are tuned really high. They're higher compression, so let's say you've been riding around on a 650 for like 6 months or whatever. You got a tamer engine that, like say like an SV650, where it's not just such a high-strung engine that it's just like every time you sneeze, the bike takes off. It goes an extra 10 miles per hour faster. Then yeah, okay, yeah. Once you learn how to ride and handle traffic and all that, yeah, you're ready for the upgrade. But to start off, no. So that's obviously that any sport bike, and people ask all the time, well, do you think if I was really careful and I did it? There is no really careful with a sport bike. Sport bikes all about risk. Every motorcycle is about risk, but sport bikes are higher risk. They just get away on you. Even the experienced riders wipe these things out. These bikes, you really have to be thinking like when you get on a cruiser, a lot of times you want to go clear your head, you jump on the cruiser and away you go. If your head's not clear, you shouldn't be on a sport bike, because it's going to get away on you. And like I say, it's going to get away on you. You're not even going to notice it. Especially when you're tired, you tend to, speed up and not realize it, right? So in these bikes, like I say, you constantly got to speed check them, which is basically you look down and you got to, back off the throttle a bit, back off the throttle. You get used to it over time, but like I say, without the experience, and you're distracted by being new, and you're not really good at low speed handling, and you're not really, sure of, managing the power, it's too much of a distraction. So once you get used to riding, then get used to a bigger bike, sure. Okay, so that's the first type of bike, and those were the obvious ones. Now the next bike is not going to be obvious at all, and I don't have any pictures for you, but the next type of bike, and I put the two bikes that you shouldn't start with into two categories: fast bikes and heavy bikes. So the next bike, probably one of the best deals on the market that you can get for a big bike, and that is a Honda Goldwing. And I know before you before you start laughing, the Honda Goldwing is a horrible beginner bike. Now I've ridden them, and they are smooth, they are silky, they handle good. They're a great bike. You get those things cruising, they're fantastic. They're quite docile for a bike of its size. So what's the problem? Okay, so you just came out of your course. Okay, you don't want a little bike because you want to go touring with the missus and you want to keep up with all your buddies with big bikes and whatever. Okay, great. So you go out, you find a $2,500 Goldwing. It's a 1500cc bike. This thing's got the power of a freight train in it. Power's there if you need it. You don't have to use it if you don't want it. Okay, no problem. You go, you get it, you put the missus on there. You head down the highway, no problem. Okay, you take your first exit, no problem. Okay, you ride around on it. What's the problem with the bike? It's a beautiful bike to ride. It's very smooth. It's quiet. It's virtually vibrationless. Well, the newer ones anyway. Well, here's the problem. Okay, the bike starts off at what, 800, 900 pounds, typically. Okay, now fill it full of fuel. You got what, 5 gallons there, 6 gallons there. You got some weight of fuel. Now, if we take if we took an average size people, most people are way overweight. But we'll take, say, the guy's 180 pounds and his wife's 140. Okay, so you got that combined weight on there, on top of that 800 pounds dry weight, right? And the fuel. Now you've got saddlebags and the carry case, luggage rack on the back full. You probably got an extra couple hundred pounds in there, all in, right? Maybe not a couple hundred, but say, well, probably you could probably put it, say, up to another 200 pounds of equipment on there. Okay, now before you know it, with two people up, you're 1,600 to 2,000 pounds, depending on the weight of the people or whatever. Now you've got a ton going down the road, right? Now, here's what happens. You're out, it's a nice sunny day, it's not too bad, roads are good, everything's good. You head out on the missus, you're out on the highway for about an hour and a half. Suddenly she's tapping your leg because she's got to pee. You know what I mean? You know what I'm talking about. You find the first exit. Okay, you take it off. It's a road you're not familiar with. The exit goes fine. You see like a little rest stop, but it's at the bottom of a very steep hill. And you start going down that hill, no problem. Okay. You start to use semi-proper braking techniques, but you gain a little more speed going down the hill than what you're used to because the bike weighs about 1,600 to 2,000 pounds now. And you basically come to a stop, but at the bottom of the stop you have to turn left, right, doesn't matter. But there's a bit of a gradient. So you're coming off a steep hill and you're coming down the hill with the bike, okay, and you got to turn. Now, you were used to a lighter bike where every time you do this, you would kind of like move the bike towards the direction you want to turn, which is normal, right? But then when you come to a stop, because you're going a little bit fast, it's like, oh, you grab a handful of brake with the bars, ever so slightly turn left or right, doesn't matter. And then all of a sudden, it's just like an elephant kicked you in the ass, and the bike just bolts off to the opposite direction of the bars return. All that inertia just kind of goes into the front tire, and down you go. You and the missus go down. What the hell happened? Well, you got a heavy bike, right? Laws of inertia, right? And this is something, if you were coming down the road on a 250 and the bars were a little bit too turned when you jammed on the brakes, yeah, you'd kind of ride up on the tank and maybe you'd hit the bars, but you'd probably be able to stop the bike from hitting the ground, right? You can't do that with a heavy bike. A bike, when it's going down, period. And heavy bikes, the reason why I pick on the Goldwing is because every time I've ever seen a Goldwing go down, it was always, and I'm not picking on the boomers, but it's usually older people that don't have proper riding techniques. These are the guys that always use just the front brake only. I've been riding for 25 years. Yeah, you still don't realize that you got to stabilize the motorcycle with the back brake, right? And these are the guys that, when they're coming down a hill, they don't realize the weight of the bike. They just use the front end. The front end starts to dive and become a little bit squirrely and unstable. As they're putting their legs out, now they've got no balance on the bike whatsoever, and down they go with the misses, right? I've seen more Goldwings fall over at like 2 miles an hour than any other bike I've ever seen. I don't know why people ditch these bikes at the rate they do, but they do. They're backing them out of the out of the garage, and there's a bit of a like a lip at the garage. They just get kind of caught up on the leg on something, and you'll do this on any motorcycle. The difference is like on my say TT600, which weighs 374 pounds, it's like, oh, I'm a little off balance. Oh, okay, well, I just kind of stop myself and pull the bike back up and get realigned and back up again, right? On an 800 pound, 900 pound bike, you can't do that. It goes down, it goes down. I mean, they even have a reverse on some of these bikes because they're that hard to back up if there's a bit of a hill. The other thing is that this has nothing to do with the rider, but it does have to do with like kind of rider naivety, so to speak, where you got these heavy bikes like Goldwings, and you park and there's a whole bunch of bikes around, so you decide to put it up on the center stand, and it's a hot day. Guarantee that Goldwing is going to be the first domino of bikes to, it's going to be like I've seen it happen a couple of times. Years ago, I refer to the 90s quite a bit from my biking days, but they used to have this awesome thing in the Byward Market in Ottawa, where on any given night during the summer, they would shut off the Byward Market to cars, and it would only be just bikes. And any night you could have 400 to 500 motorcycles down there, anything you could think of. And I've seen Goldwings, like guys put the Goldwings on the center stand. I'm like, dude, there's a bit of a like the parking lot's not completely level, and a hot day. I said I wouldn't do that. Like just like I know you're going to save room, let more people park, which is nice, but it's like, the wind's going to come along, and the stand's going to start to sink into the into the pavement, and it's over it goes. Next thing, 4 motorcycles are making an insurance claim because you just knocked over 5 Harleys or something like that. I've seen that happen. I've seen guys forget to put their side stands down or not put them down enough. Or park the wrong way on like a slope, just like a 1 or 2 degree slope, and then something happens, somebody bumps the bike, and the stand just kind of the side stand just kind of kicks up on them, down it goes. I've seen it happen, and it always seems to be Goldwings. I don't know why it's always Goldwings, because there's a lot of heavy bike out there, but I use the Goldwing because it's a very popular bike, and maybe that's what it has to do. It's just like, okay, it happens to a lot of bikes, but it's just because there's so many Goldwings, I saw it a little more consistent with that. Not all the time. Mind you, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying you can never ride a Goldwing. Like I say, these bikes are awesome to ride, but you have to understand, you've got to, always you have like 1,000 pounds going down the road, half ton to a ton, depending on how you load them up. And this goes for any tour bike, really. Any tour bike. So big, heavy tour bikes, even big, heavy cruisers, I would kind of stay away from the heavy stuff. Yes, heavier bikes are great when you're on the highway and it's windy and you're not blowing all over the place. But especially with newer riders that don't quite have their speed, like sure their speed yet, for cornering. It's not uncommon to see like these Goldwing guys or Harley guys going off the road blowing a corner because they tend to run wide in the corner because these bikes don't, the Goldwing's better than any Harley for cornering, there's no doubt about that, but they do have their limitations, right? So the average Harley would corner at say 25 degrees, 22 to 25 degrees. Goldwing might be just a tad bit more than that, but once you start hitting floorboards or exhaust or whatever, either you high center the bike and you lose control of the front end, down you go, with the misses on it, or you blow the corner, you go across the opposing lane and into the ditch. That tends to happen when people don't know how to manage those big bikes through a corner. It's usually not the first corner. It's like if there's 3 corners in a row, the newbie will do this. He'll take the first corner too fast, blow the apex at the second corner, and then come in at the wrong entry of the third corner, and then blow that corner, and then either end up in the ditch or in oncoming traffic, whatever. I mean, like a Goldwing, if you've been riding for a couple of months, or a lot of riding in like say a month or two, yeah, you're ready for a Goldwing. But the thing is, what you're not ready for is that weight of the bike, and that's something that people don't tend to talk about. They either buy, like the adventure bikes. I wouldn't say those were a no go. It depends if it's like an adventure sport touring bike that's really tall and really heavy and real top endy. Well, it still fits into all the same problems you're going to have with like something like a Goldwing heavy. So I'm not trying to discourage people from buying Goldwings. I think they're awesome bikes. They are fun to ride. I've never owned one, but I have ridden them, and they're it's like a convertible kind of. you know, it's not really my type of motorcycle, but if you wanted to go cross country, that's the bike. That's the gold standard, right? Um, yeah, so I just thought I would make a, you know, make a, because I haven't seen anybody talk about, like I've talked about people that, talk about what a good beginner bike is, and a lot of times I disagree with the what a good beginner bike is, but I know what's not a good beginner bike, and anything that's really fast, like Hayabusa, like Hayabusas, R1s, even R6s, even the older bikes, GSXRs, whatever they are, just, like get some experience before you try those, right? Like anybody can get those bikes moving. That's not the problem. Anybody can get those bikes moving fast. That's even less of a problem. The problem is getting them stopped properly. The problem is, being, situationally aware in traffic. The Goldwing, you're sitting upright. It's easy to stay situationally aware. You got big mirrors. You can turn your head. The bike's nice and stable. The throttle's very, like you can watch the cows go by and look down. Where, if you set the speed at 73 kilometers an hour, you know what I mean? Like these bikes have cruise control too. So I mean, like you basically, yeah, the handling part of the bike is not like the highway bike part of the bike is fine. Um, Stop go traffic, again, the bike, the nice thing is it doesn't take off like a rocket ship like the sport bikes. So stop go traffic, not too bad. But again, I've seen, these big tour type bikes go down, especially guys that are not used to having a passenger on the back, and or a heavy passenger on the back. I used to, like on my little 400cc Kawasaki LTD 440, I'd take my buddy on a ride to, I'd take him to drop him off at a place here or there, and all my roommates, I'd, give them a lift or whatever, and all these guys were like over 200 pounds, right, except for one. The big guy, he was like 240, so like, like having him on the back of that little bike was pretty comical to see at the first in the first place. But we go bike rallies and say, yeah, jump on the back, man, we're going to go to the bike rallies, whatever, go all over the place, and whatever. But when they shift their weight, you know what I mean, like if you're not used to that, passenger riding is it's a different ball game altogether. When you have a nervous passenger, it is very hard to keep control of the bike. They'll make you run wide in the corners type of thing. I've always been really good with passengers. I used to, like, for example, my old singer, when I used to pick her up to go to a jam, where our rehearsal or whatever, and at first she was terrified of being on a motorcycle. So obviously she would like pretty much put death grip around my waist, which I could barely breathe. And then she would sit up on, so far up on the seat because she was so afraid to fall off, like my nuts were on the tank. I was like, you gotta back up a bit, And but once she got used to it, like she was an awesome passenger till that. So again, newer riders don't really know how to talk to passengers. Like kind of like, if we're going to the right, look to the right. If we're going to the left, just look over my shoulder, whichever way we're turning, and just stay with the bike. Like don't try to counter lean the bike, because when they try counter leaning the bike, you feel it on the front end. Now, when you're an experienced rider, you know how to deal with it. But when you're not, and you got a heavy bike, it throws you off, right? So, and then of course on a sport bike, like, I mean, passengers on a sport bike is kind of, to me, it's just kind of a no-no anyway. It's just like, yeah, okay, go, like, mind you, if you got the bench seat type, some sport bikes, they're like, they're still considered sport bikes, but they have like a two-up seat. Yeah, they kind of look a bit fugly that way, but one good thing about them is that you got a proper seat on there, but the passenger's never sitting at a proper height. You know what I mean? Like they're always sitting too high, and it's not comfortable for them to begin with usually. But the worst part is that they start getting cramped or whatever. They start squirming around on the back, but it's not like they're going to be on there for a long time. Like usually, a passenger on a sport bike is like, okay, I'm going to take you for like a 20-minute run, and then you're going to come back. you know, you're going to be sore for the next 3 days. You know what I mean? But uh, if like you get used to that, you know what I mean? And then again, with a passenger on the back, it's like, never mind the mirrors. Like, what I mean? Like, you have to be able to do a shoulder check properly. So again, sport bikes definitely a no for a beginner, um, and really heavy bikes. Now, what would be a good weight of a bike to start with? Well, I think in under 500 pounds is probably ideal. Over 400 pounds is probably ideal. So somewhere in that range. If you get a bike that's really light, say like 300 pounds, 350 pounds, something like that, they're fine, but they tend to get knocked over by the wind. I'm telling you this from experience. Like, it's like, it doesn't matter where you park the bike. You can park it with the wind, but there's always that crosswind that blows them over. So there's that. The statistic is that if you're going to go down, it's usually going to be in your first year, right? And if you ride long enough, you're probably going to have a few mishaps or whatever. So I would recommend, like, don't get a bike that, get a bike as close to the style you want. So if you want a cruiser, I mean, like, Viragos are great bikes. Like, okay, you can get it like a Virago 1100. The bike's still under 600 pounds and it's easy to handle. Fully loaded, you're not going to be, really, really out of control with something like that. I wouldn't start off with something that big for the most part, but I wouldn't recommend it. But I mean, you could live with it. Like Suzuki Intruders, V Stars. I think V Stars are probably really good starter bikes. The weight might be this V-Star 650 the weight on it might be a bit much for some beginners, but that bike is the most docile motorcycle in history. That clutch takes forever to let out. It just, like, you can't pop that clutch. It's designed so much for the newbie in mind. Great bike, and it's heavy enough that it's slow enough that and it's a very low compression engine, so like even with the shaft drive, you can come down a big hill and downshifting, you won't lock up the back rear like you would on some other bikes, right? A very, very forgiving bike. Those bikes are probably pretty good, but again, they do start to get on the heavy side once you get into that 600-pound range. Great when you're on the highway, but again, you got to be a little more careful when you're coming to a stop. Again, not that you won't get used to it, but I'm talking somebody that just came out of their course. So that wouldn't be the bike I would learn on. I would learn on, like I say, the lighter bikes. Regardless of the displacement, as much, like I say, a Virago 1200, get one that's all banged up, so at least if you can learn the do's and don'ts of a bigger bike on that, and it's still a light enough bike that it's, even with two up, it's not too bad to stop coming down a big hill type of thing. And again, I've seen it happen to Harley guys, I've seen it happen to Goldwing guys all the time. Sport bike guys, they usually don't have a problem coming down the hill because the bike is light enough. Where they get the problem is the stop-go traffic. You know what I mean? Like, they always tend to ram the car ahead of them. I've seen that happen to me a couple of times. Whereas, like, you got a newbie on a sport bike and he takes off, he either stalls the bike or he, like, whiskies the throttle but and smacks the bumper ahead of him. Again, these things, like I say, after about like 2 or 3 weeks of riding on a good beginner bike, like say like an SV650, or like this, like SV650s, like stuff like that. And there's so many variations of that bike too. Something like that is great to start on, but you'll probably get bored of that bike and want something bigger. It's a good big bike trainer. The Ninja 300, again, excellent sport bike trainer. I would go with the 500cc bike though, just so you don't outgrow it, like a Ninja 500. Excellent bike, excellent bike. The Honda CB 500 or CBR 500, excellent bike. SV 650, excellent bike. You know what I mean? So yeah, those bikes, what also makes them good is that they're light enough, but they're also big enough too that you can get used to the bigger engine, but they're not so high tuned like a sport bike that you're gonna, have to worry about keeping up to the, like managing the throttle and all that stuff. right around one of those for, like I say, a couple of months, you probably then, okay, you learn, like, you don't know, what your, you know, you don't know what your skills are until they're tested, right? And the thing I found was for myself is that, like, you'd go out riding with new riders, for example, and if they don't have, this is the other thing, if you're doing a group ride, there's nothing worse than having the newbie in the group ride with a sport bike, per se, because they, newbies typically can't maintain distance, lane, or throttle speed, right? Like they just, they're on the throttle, off the throttle, on the throttle, and they're all over the place, right? And they're squirrely in the lane because they haven't learned how to take a hold a line going through a corner yet. And that's why, like, these bikes, like I say, the Ninja 300s, they're fine because, while the group, like say you got 10 bikes in a group, yeah, it tends to accordion a bit where, whenever you see the group kind of breaks apart and it comes together, back together, and breaks apart back together, it's usually because there's newbies in there, right? So you have the experienced guy in the front, got a more experienced guy in the very, very back, keeping the group, protected from the traffic or whatever. Uh, yeah, that's no problem. But the thing is a lot of people, like, for example, getting back to the SV650, which I spent a lot of time on that bike, well, I mean, a lot of time, but, I got 10 hours of road experience on that bike, and I learned a lot about what that bike was capable of. I would never buy one for myself because it's too underpowered for me. But I can imagine the 1100 version of it would be just awesome. For example, I remember back in the 90s, the Vulcan 1500s, when they came out, those things were freight trains, and they still are. The suspension wasn't the greatest for that bike, but definitely it was a heavy bike. It was like 800 pounds, something like that. But it was just gobs and gobs of torque. It was just, it put a smile on my face. I was like, now that's a bike. But a bike like that would be just too much power for a noob and too much weight. You know what I mean? But once you got used to that, holy geez, what a great bike. What a great bike. Um, yeah, like passenger, like the bike was peppy enough that it wasn't VMAX fast, but it was, you could feel it pulling your arms off kind of fast if you really hammered on it. Like, I mean, it was a very torquey bike, but it also, if you downshifted a little bit too fast with it, you could lock up because it was a shaft drive, right? So that's the other thing. Shaft drive bikes, you know, they, they they can, especially in the rain, if you downshift too fast. Newbies tend to do this. Is bikes with shaft drives, okay? They'll lock up the back end because of the compression of the motor. So whenever you're picking a bike, whether it's like, say, a Honda Shadow, uh, fully decked out or something like that, if the bike is really heavy, it's what gets you in the rain is the back end will slip out, right? And when you're braking, if the back end slips out, it's not so bad. But if it's really slippy, this is where heavy bikes, especially if it's kind of like a gradient, you know, on a curve, and you're going a little bit too fast and the road's wet, you touch that front brake, again, you got all that weight. You got to really, really learn your brakes on the heavier bikes. On the lighter bikes, it's still, it's still a danger, but they're easier to maintain that, especially when there's high winds and stuff like that. So shaft drive bikes, like I say, you got to watch when you're downshifting too fast. I've ridden a lot of Viragos. I never owned one, but like almost every friend I had a Virago, and I don't know what the biggest one I tried. I don't think I ever got to try the 1200, but I'm pretty sure I tried the 1100, and it was a very torquey bike, and it was great. But if you closed the throttle too fast and downshifted, it's like you'd hear the back end squawk because you'd lock up the back end with the drive shaft, right? So you have to watch out for that with the bigger, more powerful bikes too. Uh, the shaft drive is the most maintenance free. Belt is the smoothest, and chain is usually the quickest. So sport bikes tend to always have chains on them because, especially with all that back pressure, uh, compression, when you downshift, with a chain you're less likely to squawk the back end. But you can do it. Trust me, you can do it. But with the shaft drive, you can actually lock it up fast enough that you know, like if you downshift too fast, some of the shaft drive bikes will actually you'll throw yourself over the bars basically. Basically. So you got to watch out for that. You can even do that on a Goldwing, but a Goldwing is not too bad. But like I remember the SV650. One thing I remember about it was how low a compression it was to use compression to back pressure to from the engine to basically slow it down. Like it was almost impossible to lock up the back end on that bike, so that made it a really good beginner bike. But again, just a little bit underpowered for my liking. But a nice bike though, very comfortable. So I guess that's all I gotta say about that. So whatever bike you buy as your first bike, you know, buy with the idea of if it goes down, not a big deal. You know, buy something a little older, buy something a little bit, you know, something very practical, you know, something with good riding stance where you're not hunched over or sitting in a V. So you don't want to be hunched over in jockey position like you are on a regular sport bike, and you definitely don't want to be sitting like, you know, with ape hangers and forward bars. Yeah, they look cool, but you need riding skills before you get on bikes that are wacky like that. I've ridden with ape hangers. I don't really particularly like them. Your arms get tired too fast. Um, I've had bikes with forward controls. It doesn't matter what brand. Maybe mainly it's Harleys, but even all the new cruisers now they've got forward controls. And when you get at highway speeds, your feet tend to blow off the pegs. But at low speeds, forward controls can be kind of wonky for handling. Uh, you know, because you're just, you know, mid control pegs are the best for, you know, where you can really, you know, get good control of the bike at low speeds. So whatever you pick, um, you know, of a bike, I wouldn't get something too big. And if it is a big engine, you know, like, you know, try to go with something that's, you know, really forgiving to ride. Do a little bit of research on that. Try to get something, like I say, not too heavy. Most people will be fine depending on where you live, but if you're in the city particularly, you're going to find out a heavy bike is it's a docile, easy bike until it's not, right? Like when it wants to go down, it's going to go down. And what gets you is usually improper stopping techniques. Again, I don't know why I've seen so many Goldwings hit the ground at like snail pace, and it's usually a guy trying to back out or, like I say, coming down a hill, just, you know, with too much front brake and not enough back brake, and with the, you know, like just not being able to handle the weight of the bike when it comes to the stop. It just seems that's what I've seen the most. So it may, and almost every time it was a rider that was not used to having the passenger on the back, and it was like his first bike. It's like, okay, how long have you been riding for? Well, 3 weeks now. You know what I mean? So it's never about just getting the bike up and going. Anybody can get a bike up and going. So I know it's a bit of a long video, but a long-winded video, but I thought it was an important kind of thing to point out. And I'll probably do a video on what I think a great starter bike is. And there's a lot of good-looking starter bikes, but in a nutshell, um, think like dirt bike geometry, where your back is almost straight up and down. You've got bars that your elbows are relaxed. The bars aren't too wide, but they're back enough, and you got good maneuverability. You know, not too much of a kick out on the front, dihedral on the front end, and then mid control pegs. Those are the bikes that are the best for, I think, for learning, because they do really good at low speed. And that's where most of your problems are gonna happen, is at low speed. With the sport bikes, it's usually the opposite. But you know, with a sport bike, you have two problems. If you don't have good low speed handling characteristics, when you go to do a 180 turn on a sport bike at low speeds, you can see people ground loop the bike when they don't know how to manage the throttle. You know, you got to really be good with that back brake to do that. You know, to do a really tight turn. You know, I can turn my sport bike in a figure. I can do figure eights in its turning radius. Low speed handling is the key to being a good motorcycle rider at any speed. But the other problem you have with the sport bikes, again, is at high speed the bikes get away on you. If you're not paying attention, you'll be going too fast before you know it, and you'll blow a corner and you'll die, pretty much. So anyway, yeah, tell me what you guys think of the video. Do you think my advice was good? Do you think it was off? Do you think it's good? And I know I'm going to hear in the comments all the time stuff like, well, I've been riding for 25 years or 50 years, and I started out on a 1340 Harley, and I, never had an accident. So how much do you ride a year? Well, I ride 1,000,000 miles on the highway. Highway riding is usually not, that's the safest place to be. You don't know, like I say, you don't know what your skill levels are until they're tested. So the first time you get cut off, for example, you go into the side of the guy, you know how to keep, yourself off the guy's hood. That's the other thing. Yeah, one last thing. That's the other thing. These bikes, for example, and I watch it all the time on videos. You get a lot of guys that think that motorcyclists can do no wrong, right? And whether they're Harley guys or they're sport bike guys, or cruiser guys in general, it doesn't matter what bike it is. You see footage after footage where the guy's clearly traveling way faster than the traffic, and somebody cuts over, and then he gets mad that the guy cut him off. You know what I mean? Like, it's like you already know the statistic that most people cannot judge the speed of the motorcycle. So you should already be taking that into account. And especially when there's multiple lanes and there's a left-hand turn, a left-hand exit. When you get near exits, people are going to scramble over at the last second, right? You should already be accounting for that. So number one, watch your speed. But when you got a heavy bike, the problem you have is now how do you maneuver a heavy bike in a dangerous situation? Takes skill, right? Your evasive maneuvers. You do learn the basics of it in your course, but you don't really learn it because in the course it's like you got to go around some cones, no problem. What do you have to do when you have to dodge the semi? Don't end up in the back of the pickup truck and dodge the minivan with 12 kids in it. You know what I mean? Like, that's a total different animal. What do you do when the college student's mattress flies off the top of the damn thing while you're on the highway stuck in the center lane with a semi on each side of you? That one was an interesting one. What do you do when the chair flies out of the back of the truck and it's turning into what do you do when that tractor trailer blows out a wheel and there's shrapnel coming off of it? That one was an interesting one. You know what I mean? But again, you learn your safety margins and everything like that. The idea is to not get yourself into trouble, but it's going to happen at some point. This is where if you're not 100% comfortable on the handling of your bike and the conditions in which you will ride your bike with a passenger, without a passenger, whatever, this is what makes or breaks you. Whatever. Now with a sport bike, same thing applies, but with the sport bike, yeah, you can maneuver usually pretty good. kind of like the like the Matrix movie there with the Trinity going around all those cars. Okay, yeah, you can kind of do stuff like that to a degree, but not maybe to that ridiculousness. But same thing. Are you traveling too close? Sport bike guys usually get into so much trouble with just traveling way too much faster than the traffic. Somebody cuts over a lane and they just cannot respond fast enough. And usually, and this happens to experienced guys. You know what I mean? Like, one thing I learned about riding on a sport bike after riding cruisers for years, and then getting back into motorcycling, I started off back on a sport bike. Well, the first thing I did is I spent a lot of time just getting used to the low speed handling of the sport bike, in empty parking lots and stuff like that. Just getting really comfortable with the bike, getting everything is set up and stuff like that. So getting the mirrors in the right spot, getting the suspension set up properly, all that. Once I got all that set up, the bike was just super intuitive, whatever. But I did notice, like, especially in stop-go traffic, it's like you really got to keep your safety margin on these sport bikes because you just can't see shoulder check as good as you can when you're upright, right? So never nervous on the bike, but one thing I noticed, yeah, people still cut in. You know what I mean? Like, they're going to do it. They do it while you're in a car, let alone on a bike. You know what I mean? And people cannot judge your speed. They cannot judge your speed. As soon as you see somebody ready to turn, just like, the experienced rider will know to start to back off themselves. Never just maintain speed when somebody's about to come out of a lane. get ready to make them. You always have to be thinking ahead of the bike, right? Because the bike is going to get there faster than you can think. You see them, but then they're right in front of you, right? And you most of the time cannot respond fast enough to a car pulling out at 2 miles per hour. You know what I mean? Like, just let that part sink in. So what's the trick? Reduce the speed, right? If there's a lot of traffic around you, reduce the speed. On a sport bike, it takes a little more practice to ride, slow. And you can have fun with them, but you just got to know the time and place. And that's the other thing. The guys that just, they're stupid with these things, right? The power is addictive, but you have to know how to manage it, So anyway, yeah. So anyway, if you like this kind of content, all links are down below to help support the channel. Hope you enjoyed the video. I know some of these bikes would be very nice to have. So again, maybe not as your first bike, because that's the other thing. If you do down one of the, if you bought one of these beautiful motorcycles and it's your dream bike and you put it down, I've seen people do that too, where it's like they come right out of the course, they bought their brand new Sportster or their brand new, Kawasaki 636, whatever it was, and it's like the next time you talk to them, oh, how's it going? Oh, good. Yeah, where's your bike? Oh, I wrecked it. And it's like, oh, that was your dream bike, you know what I mean? And I've seen people wreck their dream bikes, at like basically, the bike was, still in neutral, you know what I mean? And walking out and then, dump the bike. I've seen people dump all kinds of bikes, but yeah, brand new Goldwing 1800, just guys only had it for like 3 weeks, backing out, and just like, as he's turning, it's just like the bike just gets too heavy and down it goes. And 4 people there trying to pick it up for him, and now it's got all scratches on it. Well, the good news is once you get scratches on a motorcycle, and it's like, might as well ride the piss out of it now. Who cares about the mileage about it now? So yeah, that's my take on things. But yeah, so just be careful out there. Get a practical bike for your first bike, something that if you did down it, like my Kawasaki LTD 40, I had one roommate put it through a fence. My other roommate spun it out. My other roommate, I don't know what the hell he did with it. He got it stuck in a tree. Like not very, like just like branches. I'm like, I'm like, where's my bike? He goes, because I'd let them all play around with it. And I had it blown, like I say, the wind would blow over this Kawasaki LTD 440. The bike was just around the 400-pound mark, and it was just like, you'd hear outside, and it's just, boom. It's like, oh. Go out and there's straighten the mirror, straighten the bars. So, but it was a great little bike because I didn't really care that it got banged up, and I ended up downing it in the snow. So, it's a long story short. I should have known better, but I went to work and I tried to squeeze in that last November ride, and I came out and there was 2 inches of snow on the ground, and I almost made it home. I was like, I was using my dirt bike riding experience, and I told myself, just don't touch that front brake and you'll be fine. And it was actually kind of fine until I, went down a side road where nobody went and came to the first stop sign. It was like I watched my hand in slow motion, and I was just like, no, and down I went down so fast, like it just happened like that. I wasn't hurt or nothing because it happened at like 0.2 of a mile per hour. There was a guy who's like, dude, you okay? I'm like, yeah, okay. So I got it home. Screwed up. It didn't hurt me at all, but the bike, it would, after that point, would shift into second gear. I guess I must have bent a tuning, like a shifting fork inside the transmission. So that bike, that was it. Thank God it wasn't my dream bike, right? But I got a lot of experience on that bike, and it taught me a lot of do's and don'ts, and it was a very forgiving bike. It was a great little bike. It was underpowered, sure, but I mean, I learned how to, ride with passengers. I learned, like I say, bad weather. I got caught in like tail ends of hurricane, tornadoes and stuff like that, blowing across the highway. That bike really, I mean, it would blow all over the highway, in the wet. Like it was just like, yeah, like it really. That bike, I put a lot of mileage or kilometers on, whatever, and that bike really taught me a lot of why you don't buy your dream bike for your first bike, and stuff like that. But it also taught me a lot about the fundamentals of riding, and it also taught me that, after trying other bikes, it was like, the first time I tried a Goldwing, it was like, oh yeah, definitely noticed the weight. That was the first thing I noticed, was how heavy it was. It was smooth and everything, but that's the first thing I noticed. Whenever I try Harleys of different types, and then I had a Harley, so I had a 48 Panhead, and that was a chopper. That was a fun bike too. Definitely wasn't a bike to start out on, but it was a fun bike. Uh, so I learned a lot about riding different bikes, what makes a good riding bike. Like, for example, my 72 BMW was an R60/5, was would have that there is probably one of the best styles of bikes geometry wise to learn on, because you were upright, slightly leaned forward, but you had mid controls, good crown clearance. It was a great bike. It was a fantastic bike. It was shaft drive, so it was a little bit. It was a 4-speed, so you had to watch when you were downshifting with it, or else you'd lock up the back end a bit. But other than that, it was a great bike. It wasn't overpowered. It was a 600. It was almost 600 pounds, so it handled well on the highway. It was just a good all arounder, kind of like intermediate bike, but it would have been a good beginner bike too. So anyway, yeah. So like I say, all links are down below if you want to help support the channel. Next to that, rate, subscribe, share, comment, like. Be true to yourself, be true to others. Always, always do the right thing. Ride safe, and have a great day, eh?